The jacket still fit. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled it off the hook in my garage that Tuesday morning. The old Callaway Regional, patch on the chest, the name stitched above the breast pocket, the smell of road dust that 3 years in a closet hadn't quite washed out. I put it on, buttoned it to the second button the way I always had, and went to check on Audrey before I left. She was already at the kitchen table with her geometry book open and a piece of toast in her hand. 16 years old, sharp as a level, and not the type to make a fuss over things. She looked up at me and said, "You look like yourself again." I told her I'd be home by 4. She nodded and went back to her book. That was enough. That's usually enough with Audrey. I'd been away from the depot for 3 years. Not from the company, but from the daily run of it. When my wife Carol passed, I stepped back. I held my stake, kept up with the quarterly calls, signed what needed signing, and spent 3 years making sure Audrey had a father at the breakfast table every morning instead of a note on the counter. It was the right call. I'd make it again without blinking. But Audrey didn't need me hovering anymore. She'd told me so herself in that direct way she has. "Dad, I'm fine. Go drive your trucks." So I called Dale Fitch, the dispatch supervisor, a solid man, 22 years with the company, and told him I wanted a route, not the office, a route. Early mornings, the cab, the road. Dale said he'd put me on the roster himself. He sounded relieved. I pulled into the Callaway Depot at 5:45 that Tuesday. The loading bay was lit up yellow against the dark, and I could smell diesel and cardboard, and the particular cold that settles into a freight yard before the sun gets up. 3 of the drivers nodded when I walked in. 2 of them I'd hired myself. Years ago, big man named Ruiz who could load a pallet faster than anyone I'd ever seen, and a quiet guy named Teller who ran Route 12 like a clock and never missed a signature. Ruiz gave me a nod and a grin. Teller just raised his chin. That was plenty. I signed in at the dispatch window, got my clipboard and my keys, and breathed in the smell of the place. Engine oil, cold concrete, the trace of coffee from the break room down the hall. There's a sound a freight depot makes in the hour before full operation. A low idle hum of machines and men finding their rhythm, and I had missed it more than I'd admitted to anyone, including Audrey. I was about to pull out the Route 9 manifest when Dale appeared at my elbow with an expression I didn't like. "Price wants to see you," he said quietly. I didn't know the name. Who's Price? New regional VP. Came in 6 weeks ago. Dale kept his voice low. He's been restructuring. I set my clipboard down and followed him to the dispatch office. Colton Price was maybe 40, in a gray suit that cost more than 2 of my driver's weekly takes combined. He had the kind of handshake that's more presentation than greeting, and he gestured to the chair across from his desk, the way a man does when he's already decided the meeting will be short. "Mr. Doran," he said, pulling up something on his laptop. "You're returning from personal leave, listed here as a route driver, Route 9. He said it without looking up. That route's been absorbed into the 9A consolidated corridor. We streamlined in Q3. Now he looked up. Your position has been restructured out. I'm sorry for the confusion. You should have been notified before you came in." I let that sit for a moment. The loading bay was humming outside. I could hear a forklift backing up, and somewhere on the dock a tailgate dropped with a sound like a single flat note. "Who authorized the 9A consolidation?" I asked. "That was a division-level decision." He closed his laptop. "We'll get you your paperwork. You're welcome to apply for any open positions through HR. 4 minutes, start to finish." He was already reaching for his phone before I'd stood up. I thanked him, because that's how I was raised, and I went to the break room. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot Dale always kept going. The same dark roast he'd been buying, from the same supplier on Merchant Street for 15 years, and I sat down at the corner table by the window that looked out over the yard. I could see my truck idling at Bay 4. The man who was supposed to take Route 9 now hadn't shown up yet. I am not a man who moves fast when he doesn't need to. People have mistaken that for slowness my whole life. Carol used to say I operated on a different clock than most people. Longer intervals, deeper ticks. She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. I watched a loader named Peterson work the Bay 4 ramp with the easy precision of a man who's done the same job so many thousand times that his body knows the angles before his mind calls them. Good work. All of it. The kind of work that keeps a region running, that nobody writes articles about, that matters every single day. I had built this company around people like Peterson and Dale and Ruiz because I believe that work done well and done consistently is the nearest thing most of us get to honor. Nobody was going to take it apart in a 6-week restructure if I had anything to say about it. What Colton Price didn't know, what he had no reason to know, because he'd been in the division 6 weeks and had apparently not done the one thing I would have done first, which is read the ownership structure of what you're standing in. was that Callaway Regional Freight was not a corporate division in the conventional sense. It had started as one, back when I was 31 and running routes myself. The parent company had let it slide into the red, then into worse than the red, and in the third year of losses, they'd offered to sell it at a price that was, frankly, an embarrassment to everyone involved. I bought it, not all at once, and not loudly. I bought the controlling interest, 61%, through a holding entity called Doran Logistics Group, structured quietly with my attorney, a careful woman named Lenore Castillo, who had been practicing freight and transport law for 30 years, and who checked in by phone on the last business day of every quarter. Today was the last business day of Q3. I was on my second cup of coffee when Dale appeared in the break room doorway. He looked like a man walking into a conversation he wasn't sure he wanted to have. "Mitch," he said, "there's a call for you at the main desk. Woman named Castillo." I picked up my coffee and followed him out. Lenore was brief, the way she always was. "I'm running the quarterly review," she said, "and I'm flagging a route consolidation, 9 into 9A, that doesn't have holder consent on file. That's a material operational change under Article 7 of the holding agreement. I need sign-off from the majority holder before it stands." "I know," I said. A pause. "Are you at the depot?" "Break room." Another pause, shorter. "Then I'd suggest you go have a conversation." I thanked her, hung up, and handed the receiver back to Dale. He was watching me the way people watch a quiet river when they start to wonder how deep it goes. "You want me to get Price?" he asked. "I'll go to him," I said. The dispatch office felt smaller the second time. Price was on his phone when I knocked on the open door, and he held up one finger without looking at me, the universal gesture of a man who hasn't yet learned to read a room. I waited. He wrapped up his call, set the phone down, and looked at me with the mild impatience of someone dealing with an administrative complication. "Mr. Doran, if this is about the paperwork, the Route 9 consolidation requires majority holder consent under Article 7 of the Doran Logistics Holding Agreement," I said. "That consent hasn't been filed, which means the 9A corridor isn't operational yet." He blinked. "The holding agreement. Doran Logistics Group holds 61% of Callaway Regional Freight, has since 2009. I let that land without dressing it up. My attorney flagged it on the quarterly review. You'll have a call from her within the hour if you haven't already." The office was very quiet. Outside, the forklift had stopped. Price sat back in his chair slowly, the way a man does when the ground has shifted under him and he's recalibrating. To his credit, he didn't bluster. He pulled up something on his laptop, read it, and then read it again. "You're Mitchell Doran," he said, not a question. More like a man reading a name off a cornerstone and realizing the building is still standing. "I am," I said. He looked up. "Why were you signed in as a route driver?" "Because that's what I came back to do." I said it simply, because it was a simple thing. I've been away 3 years. Dale put me on the roster. I like Route 9. I know every stop, every loading dock, every back road shortcut when the highway backs up. It's good work. He stared at me for a moment. I watched him try to find the version of this conversation where he had the advantage and come up empty. "Mr. Doran," he said carefully, "the 9A consolidation was a cost reduction measure. 3 routes absorbed into one optimized corridor. The numbers support it. The numbers support it if you're only looking at fuel costs and driver hours," I said. "They don't support it if you factor in the Hendricks account on Route 9. They're a net 60 client. They've been with us 11 years. And Dave Hendricks called Dale last week to say he'd been hearing rumors about consolidation, and he was already talking to Farlow Transport about a trial run." I paused. "Losing Hendricks costs us about $42,000 a quarter. The consolidation saves maybe 18. Price's jaw tightened slightly. He hadn't known about the Hendricks call. I could see it. "Additionally," I said, 2 of the 3 drivers you cut in the restructure are on the seniority list. Releasing them exposes the company to a grievance under the independent contractor agreement we signed in 2021. That's Dale's paperwork. He flagged it to Division 3 weeks ago." I looked at Dale, who was standing in the doorway behind me. Dale nodded once. Slowly, Price closed his laptop. He took a breath, and then he did something I respected. He didn't try to save face at the expense of the facts. "What would you like to do?" he asked. "Restore the 2 drivers. Keep Route 9 as a standalone. The 9A corridor can absorb routes 12 and 14. That's the consolidation that actually pencils out, and it doesn't touch any seniority agreements." I picked up a pen from his desk and wrote the route numbers on a notepad. "Lenore will draw up the amendment. It'll be clean by end of day." He looked at what I'd written. "And the Route 9 driver?" "That's me," I said. "I'll be at Bay 4 at 5:45. He nodded once, a small nod, but a real one. I left the dispatch office and went back to the break room for the rest of my coffee. Dale came in behind me and stood by the counter for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "You could have told me. You knew what you needed to know," I said. "You're a good supervisor, Dale. Best dispatcher in the region. That doesn't change." He poured himself a cup and sat down across from me. Outside, the yard was coming alive. Trucks starting, tailgates dropping, the organized noise of a freight depot moving into its day. "The Nina thing was his idea?" Dale asked. "Probably looked good on paper coming in," I said. "He's not a bad man. He just didn't read the building before he started moving the furniture." Dale almost smiled. "You going to run the route today, tomorrow? Let Lenore get the amendment filed first." I finished my coffee and stood up. "Today I'm going to check on Bay 4, say hello to the Hendricks driver, and be home by 3:30 so I can take Audrey to her geometry test review." Dale looked at me. "You drove out here at 5:45 in the morning to get restructured and drink break room coffee." "I also had a very good conversation," I said. "I was home by 3:15. Audrey was at the kitchen table with the same geometry book, but she'd made a fresh pot of coffee, which told me she'd had a good afternoon." I hung the jacket back on its hook. "How was it?" she asked, without looking up from her book. "Good," I said. "I drive tomorrow." She nodded. That was enough. That's usually enough with Audrey. I drove Route 9 the next morning at 5:45, same as I always had. The Hendricks dock, the cold air off the highway, the shortcut past the grain elevator when the interchange backed up. The manifest was the same one Dale had printed for me the day before, still on my clipboard. I signed every stop. I was back at the depot by noon. Nobody who saw me that morning would have known anything had changed. That was the point. That had always been the point. The work is good work. That doesn't change because of who signs the deed.